So I've had a look through your programme, and I thought this is a really exciting conference. I think it's really important that you start exploring these discussions around the hybrid working and how we get students engaging virtually. But also I noticed that there's quite a lot of emphasis on that student transition. And for me, that's something that I'm really passionate about. Although my own discipline isn't the same as yours, that area of taking students from school and college and getting them used to a university environment is always a real challenge. But I think if we look forward this year and possibly even to next year, it's going to be even more of a challenge, because these are students who've really not had the same school and college experience, and bringing them into a university environment, it's going to take quite a while to get them to understand how they need to be working. So it'll be interesting to see what emerges, and it's great that you're able to share your own experiences over the past few years and some of the interesting ideas that you've got to really make changes to the student experience. So finally, just really to say thank you for coming along. Thank you for making the effort to come in person, because I think it really will change the event. And have a great 24 hours. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tracy. Thank you. Super, right. And now we've got a word from our sponsors. We're lucky to be sponsored, as we are every year, by Oxford University Press. And somewhere in the audience, I can't see them at the moment, we've got, no, right in the front, we've got Lucy and Katie to say something about OUP. So if you'd like to do your stuff at the front. Thanks very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. And on behalf of Oxford University Press, I'd like to welcome you to the 2021 Bioscience Education Summit. It's so good to be here in person and to be able to reconnect with this community again. So for those of you who I haven't met yet, I'm Lucy Wells. I'm the Commissioning Editor for Higher Education Science at OUP, and I'm joined by my colleague Katie, who's there in the third row. And Katie works with me across our science titles, so some of you might have been working with her as well. It's great to be back in person, and I'm glad we've still got the option of virtual attendance too, so welcome to everyone, whether you're joining us physically or virtually. Looking at the conference programme, it's clear this event is going to be a really great opportunity for us all to reflect on the huge changes that have been wrought in our sector in the last 18 months. Now, I promised myself I would not use the words challenging or unprecedented to describe these months, because not only have they become days, but also it's just simply inadequate to describe the upheaval that we've all experienced as a sector since February 2020. I will say, however, that as someone who works with the higher education bioscience community every day, I've just been in awe of the resilience and the creativity and the sheer hard work that's been shown across the board. I've seen university educators learning entirely new skills overnight, adapting their teaching materials at a moment's notice, and providing more support than ever to stressed and isolated students, and of course, all amidst personal difficulties and restrictions that nobody could ever have envisaged. So I just want to say it's been genuinely inspiring seeing how you as a community have continued to prioritise student learning and student welfare in these exceptionally tough circumstances. As higher education publishers, we at OUP have also experienced significant changes in these last months, not only in how we work internally and how we engage with our authors and our users, but also in the kind of products we create and the new needs that these products now have to meet. And the most urgent and obvious change for us has been the change of medium from print to digital. I think previously some saw the higher education sector as one of the last bastions where the printed book dominated. But now, due to remote learning and the pandemic, digital products to support online learning can't be seen as an afterthought or a sort of nice backup option anymore. They've really become the main medium now for all our educational content. This transition was happening anyway, but it was happening quite slowly, and the pandemic just hugely sped it up. So this has really transformed the way that we as publishers think about our content. And it doesn't mean there's no future place for print, but it does mean that having content in effective, reliable, high-quality digital form is just essential to be able to support students and instructors. And it also gives us opportunities to build products that just wouldn't have been possible in a print-only or a print-default world. And I think the last 18 months have also brought us new and urgent perspectives on what actually constitutes a good digital product. because educational products now need to support the blended teaching and the active learning approaches being adopted by more and more university lecturers who need to engage with all their students, whether those students are sitting in front of them or trying to unmute themselves at the end of a Zoom call. And I'm sure that everyone attending this conference is already well aware of all the benefits of blended teaching and active learning. But what we've seen is that these approaches have become mainstream requirements in a way and at a speed that I don't think any of us could have envisaged. And for us in the publishing industry, that means ramping up our focus on interactivity and flexibility of our content. So offering ways for users to engage in different ways, such as through audio and video, and building in opportunities for self-assessment and problem-solving practice, not just as sort of tack on gimmicks, but as core requirements that genuinely help users to get the most out of our content. We're still learning. Progress is never as fast as we'd all like it to be, but change is happening, and it's bringing new ideas and opportunities in its wake. So change can be exciting, but I think we'd all agree it's unarguably exhausting. And in a year when many of us have barely had time to stop for breath, let alone for thought, I hope this year's summit can be an opportunity for us all to just take a moment and reflect on what we've done in the last 12 months, what we've learnt, how we've changed, what changes we're going to be taking forward. We all know that we are not out of the woods yet when it comes to COVID, but I really hope that the lessons we've all learned and the progress that we've seen in the last few months will stand all of us in good stead as we face the uncertainties of this academic year. So thanks for taking the time to be here today. I hope to be able to catch up with as many of you as possible in the breaks, and I hope we all have a refreshing, productive and inspiring time. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lucy. That's brilliant. And just to mention that if you haven't seen it already, there's some OUP material on the website for this conference. So if you go to the website and there's an OUP page, and you can take a look there, and we've got a new textbook as well. One of the authors right here. Yes, do take a look at that. So we've now got half an hour, as is traditional. We begin this meeting with an icebreaker, and we've also got a traditional leader of that activity, who is David Harry from Newcastle. And every year he dreams up a new embarrassing way to kick things off. And I'm sure this year is no exception, so as he masks up and strides to the front. Okay, I'll leave you in David's hand for the next 30 minutes.
Okay. If you can do me a favour before we start, every time I start talking, someone could shout, "You're on mute." It'll help me acclimatise that to the real world. Last year we did an icebreaker, which was kind of, I kind of made it because it was all about coming out of COVID. It was about how COVID had been for us and how we were going to move forward. So I'm not going to talk about COVID in this one because I'm obviously jinxed it. What we're going to do is we're going to do a kind of a Scrabble-based activity, and we're going to go outside to make the most of the fact we can have a bit of space and a bit of sunshine. So, but I'll give a bit of explanation before we go out. I've had to pare this down a bit because my original version was a bit overcomplicated. What you're going to do is you're going to get into groups of about 5. Okay? So that's not a student group of 5, which would be a group of about 10. That's actually a group of 5, if possible. And then what you're going to do is you're going to be given a bag of Scrabble pieces. Now, to minimise people's concern about kind of spreading infection and things, I'm going to suggest that one member of the group does the Scrabble pieces and manage the Scrabble pieces. What you're going to do is, to start with, when I say go, you're going to take out 10 Scrabble tiles, and you're going to try and make the longest biomedical, so I'm sorry for those who want to pronounce the like, but it's biomedical word. Okay? So out of those 10 tiles, you've got to make the longest biomedical word. You've got 5 minutes to do that, so a bit of time to chat, get to know each other, because it is, after all, I don't need this on now, do I? It is, after all, you feel naked without it now, don't you? It is, no idea what I'm saying. So, 10 tiles, biggest word possible. You can, and as is traditional, I'm going to trust your honesty here. Okay? So even if you've got Nick in your team, I'm going to trust your honesty. You can do 4 swaps, negotiating with your team members. Okay? So you take 10 pieces out, that's 4 swaps. Not adding 4, you take one and put one back in the bag. Okay? So if you get into groups of 5, preferably 5 people you've not met before. I know that might be limited, but preferably 5 people you've not met before. Certainly not 5 people from your institution. Find a spot on the grass outside. Distance, but not too distant, so I don't have to shout too much. And then when I say go, go. I shall bring round the bag of tiles, otherwise it's not going to work too well. Okay, so you go outside now. The first 5 minutes is just a start, so this is a taster for 5 minutes.
That is at Scrabble. Terrible.
I hate Scrabble.
This one and that one. That's the one. I think the tree. Because I imagine people talking to us tonight, just before COVID. Just when you know All right. It gives me a great pleasure to introduce this year's Bioscience Teacher of the Year. That's the Hub's Bioscience Teacher of the Year. Nigel Francis from Cardiff University, and he's going to be talking to us about practical teaching through the pandemic. Over to you, Nigel.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to come here and present to you today, and also for James and the organising committee for putting on such a fantastic conference. It's great to actually be here presenting to 3D people as well, rather than the Zoom school. What I'm going to talk to you about today is the experiences that we've had teaching through a pandemic and some of the lessons that we've learned and how we can use those lessons to enhance our teaching for practical lab-based experiences for our students moving forward. When I talk about dry laboratory science, I always think of it as a flash mob science event. And the reason I say that is because when I sent out a handful of emails to some people who are actually sitting in this room at the moment, saying, can we have a brief chat about what you're going to be doing next term? Campuses are being shut. how are we going to deliver a practical experience to our students when we can't access those physical spaces? I never thought that it would expand to being a network. It now has over 250 members from 70 different institutions in the UK, and is starting to gather momentum in the international audience as well. And for that reason, that's why I say it's a flash mob science event. So flash mob is basically any random event that's organised, usually through social media. And that was pretty much how we organised Dry Labs. It's all been through Twitter handles, it's all been through word of mouth, through emails. And it's been that sort of that natural growth of the network that has been such an inspiring thing to be part of, and why it's really one of the most proud things I've actually been doing as an academic. I didn't really realise the impact that this network was having until I sat down to work out how much time people were investing into this network. So in the 12 meetings that we've actually had so far, there have been over 700 cumulative attendees. And the number of person hours that have been devoted to the network is in excess of 12,000. If you take that as obviously an academic working day, which is 8 hours, as we all know, then that's over 1,500 working days that have been devoted to this network by people. And that is just those people that have come to the meetings to listen to their peers talking. That is not the time that people have spent preparing presentations. That's not the time that we spent advertising, editing videos, or any of that. So that is just the amount of time that people have seen and the value that they're getting from being part of this network. So what is Dry Labs Real Science? If you aren't aware of what it is a network of practice that for me is built around 4 cornerstones. Those are community, which is the most important thing for me. The community that we've built is really something very special. It's about innovation. I think we can all agree that the approaches that we've had to adopt over the last 18 months have been truly innovative. It's about opportunity. It's about providing people with a platform to share their ideas, and I think that's where the network will continue to grow. And it's about collaboration. As academics, we very often work in silos, and I think what the pandemic has offered us the chance to do is to really broaden those horizons. And as a community, come together, working collaboratively to solve really complex, challenging problems. Just to try and give you a flavour of some of the feedback that we've had from the network. So this was a quote that came from Danny Knight. She is a PhD student down at the University of Surrey. And part of her quote was saying that it was really, such a welcoming community to be part of, and that she felt that it was something that she really valued. That's really, really important, because people like Danny are going to be the bioscience educators of the future. And if we can start influencing their approach to teaching at such a young, early stage of their career, they're going to take the ideas that we've been forced to adapt, and they're going to continue evolving those ideas. And bioscience education, by default, will become better and better in the future by inspiring the next generation of educators. We ran a survey right at the start of the network to try and find out what our audience was, why people were coming. 96% of the people that joined to be part of a community of practice. When we asked them why they stayed as that part of that community, it was because of the practitioner focus. It was the ideas they were getting from the network that they could take and they could apply to their own situation, to their unique teaching situation. So it's that practitioner focus that's really important. 83% of the people who filled in the survey said they felt really welcome in the community. So it's created an environment where people are willing to share. And that's reflected by the fact that at that time, 65% of the respondents had already participated in the network. I suspect if we ran that survey again now, that number would be even higher, because people have come through and they've been more and more willing to share their ideas and their practice. Innovation for me is really hard to evidence because it's so unique to everybody. But a gentleman sitting in the room up at the back there, Alfred, sent me an email saying that it was the innovative approaches that had inspired his teaching. Not just during the pandemic, but beyond the pandemic. And I think that's the really important thing we have to remember. Everything that we've had to do in the last 18, 20 months isn't just going to fall by the wayside when COVID sort of disappears and life goes back to a new normal. All of the ideas, all the things we've had to do can be retained in our teaching. try and put some numbers on it, the 12 meetings that we've held so far, there have been 39 different talks and 39 different approaches. We haven't had the same approach duplicated. What we're seeing now is much more of these ideas being synergistically linked. So we're seeing people using simulations in order to generate data sets. We're seeing people using videos, we're seeing people using AR, VR, and I'll talk a little bit more about those later in the talk. But people are combining these ideas now to produce a really good experience for their students. And I think it's up to us now to see how we can harness those unique ideas that we've been forced into and how we can then use them in the future to enhance teaching. David Tree from the University of Brunel said that universities are better off when we work together. And for me, that's probably one of the most striking quotes I've received about this network. All too often, we'll come up with an intervention in our university, we'll try it. That may be as far as it goes. We never maybe share it with a learning and teaching conference in that university. If we do, it may be by one, maybe two other people. We normally never find out about that. If we're lucky and there's some money available, we may go and be able to present that at a national conference. But again, it's probably going to be in a parallel session with a handful of people watching it. What Dry Labs has done is provide an open platform for people to share their ideas. All of the meetings are free of charge. They're all organised via Zoom, so people don't have to travel to them. And all of the videos are hosted on YouTube and on the Lecture Remotely website. And they are being accessed long after people present their talks. In terms of trying to put some numbers on that, 96% of attendees have recommended the network to others. So they saw value in what we were doing and wanted others to share in that value. 94% said they felt confident in changing their own practice, and this last number of 90% feeling that it could influence departmental practice was really striking. Because at the start we asked how many people do you think, how often do you think you can influence departmental choice? And only 48% of people said they felt that they could actually have any positive influence at departmental level. After being part of this community, that number has risen to 90%. So they're influencing practice in their department, they have validation that the ideas that they are using are good, and they therefore feel they can influence the practice of their peers. And that's really important as we want to try and spread the message of good teaching. For me, what a community has done is allowed us to solve really complex problems. No one individual could have solved COVID. No one university could have solved COVID. But all the unique perspectives that people are seeing on the same problems that they apply to their own situation have given us a whole raft of new tools that people can apply to their teaching and use moving forward. And I think that's the real strength of what this community offers, and hopefully will continue to offer as we continue to adapt and evolve as we come out of COVID. What I'd like to do now is actually put some interactivity into the presentation. So I know a lot of you have got devices in front of you. So I'm going to ask you whether you'll be able to go onto a poll everywhere there, side, and actually give me your thoughts about why do we have practical classes. Hopefully this will work. Please. Never rely on technology, can you? So what I'll do is I'll just run through the three polls rather than going back into PowerPoint and the questions are in the polls anyway. So why do we have practical classes? What are we actually hoping to achieve with a practical class? So the link is at the top there, so it's polleb.com/Nigel Francis 940. To quite nice to actually have people in front of me when I'm doing this, because doing this via Zoom, you have absolutely no idea whether anyone's got their phone out, or anyone's going to actually put anything up, so it's always quite a relief to see people typing. One of the nice features about Poll Everywhere is that you can upvote other people's comments. So if you see one that you really like, you can give it a thumbs up. Now on still help and rise it to the top of the list. Okay, so we're talking about putting theory into practice, so that link between lectures and the practice of being a scientist. The student can learn practical skills, of course, that's one of the main things we want. The social space is really important, we'll come back to that a little bit later. With the development of the types of skills that they want to know, that link between what they're doing in the lectures and what they actually do in practical class. I think if we're really honest, we know that students come to a university wanting to do a science degree because they want to do cool experiments. They don't come to sit in a tutorial theatre or lecture theatre, they want to be doing hands-on skills. And I think what we can see there actually is that the response we're giving, the main challenge that we faced. How do we teach those practical skills, those psychomotor skills, if we can't access a physical space, if we don't have access to those pieces of equipment that those students need to use? I'm not saying I've got all the answers to that, of course I don't. But I think what we have done through COVID is to be able to give as much of an experience as we possibly can for students. So hopefully when they are back in the lab, they will be able to use a lot of the theory, a lot of the approaches we have used, and then we'll go on and do really well. If we go to the second floor. The reason I asked if I could actually use my laptop was because this was supposed to be seamless, but obviously it's not. So the second question I've got is, what are the intended learning objectives of a practical class? I'm not talking about the subject-specific nitty-gritty of each individual class. What are the broad stroke overview? What are their learning objectives? What do we want students to get from lab classes? Okay, so talking about data interpretation, analysis, certainly key skills, group work. I think that's fundamentally important. The critical interpretation of real data. So building confidence is certainly one that seems to be quite popular. I definitely agree with that. Giving students that hand-on ability to actually carry out an experiment, to learn how to use the different pieces of equipment, and to develop those skills over the course of their studies. Problem solving, practical competency, yes. Understanding how science is done, fundamentally important. After all, we are training scientists. We want to produce scientific practitioners at the end of their degree. They need to know how science is done. They need to understand the scientific method. Group work, I think, is really important. Collecting data and analysing it. So all those types of high-level skills that we can do, how many of those can we actually replicate offline though? I think if you go back, apart from those psychomotor skills that we talk about, a lot of the things that you've mentioned up there, we can do in a virtual environment. And we'll talk a little bit about how those are done in a minute. So the last question is a slight twist on that. So we know what we would like the students to learn. What do the students actually learn? The first time I ran this, somebody put up and went, how to get out of a lab class as quickly as humanly possible and into the bar. Confidence they can do it. Experiments don't work, comes up every single time. I think that's really, really important. All these kids that have come through A-level, every single experiment they do is designed to work. The first year of their course, every experiment is designed to work. And in fact, when they get to the second or the third year, and they realise it doesn't work, you can spend weeks, months, maybe even years in some cases, optimising an experiment. I think it's really important that they appreciate that. Making mistakes isn't bad, I absolutely 100% agree. Anyone who knows me knows I'm really big into my experiential learning, allowing those students to explore within that space, safely of course, but actually making mistakes and learning from those mistakes. The group working, absolutely fundamentally important. How many times have we actually seen in a lab, a group will ask the academic a question, and every single group anywhere near that is going, what did you say? What? Or they will wait until that academic has finished explaining, and then they'll all just stare at that group waiting to see what they do, and then learning from their peers, because they don't want to then have to ask the same question. But that's not a bad thing, they're learning by observing what their peers are doing. So that group working social skills is absolutely fundamentally important. Please don't go back into it. Okay, so the last part of my talk really is about taking out some of the ideas we talked about in there and how we can apply them into an offline world. In terms of learning objectives, this is work that Ian Turner did, looking at a load of different module proformas and the types of skills that students are taking from these sessions. It's about the principles of scientific inquiry, like we identified. We need to teach them to be scientists. It's about improving the understanding and that theory between the practical and what they learn in the lectures. It's about specific practical skills. So each subject has got unique skills that they need to develop. It's about giving students the opportunity to practice them multiple times. And one of the things that came out of the article I wrote with Chris and Leah McClurd for the biologists is that students that are coming into university this year may have only used equipment once. They're not going to have as much experience of using even basic scientific equipment. And that's something that we really need to be aware of moving forward for this next year. It's about development of employability skills. It's not just about being a scientist, it's about what you do with those skills. Can you communicate that science? Do you know how to write a paper? Do you know how to present results? All of those kind of skills that people develop in and around the lab class. And then to motivate and engage them, like I said, the reason they come to university to do a science degree is to do cool experiments. And that is something that I think we're seeing a lot of students are really disengaged with their studies because they haven't had as much experience this year of being in the lab and being engaged with those academics. So again, something we're going to have to work really, really hard on in the coming 12 months. How can we actually enhance what we're doing though? And this is a load of the approaches that have come out from running dry labs. Broadly, these approaches can be divided into 4 techniques. First of which is videos. We all started using videos, but how can we use them effectively moving forward? One of the big things we had to do was to streamline our practicals. We didn't have as much time in the labs, we didn't have as much time between labs because of clean down, take down. So we took a lot of the material that we'd normally give in the first 15, 20, half an hour at the start of the lab class, where we do the health and safety briefings, where we talk about the equipment they're going to use, about the theory and the outcomes, and we put a lot of that into videos online. We should keep doing that. The students can view that in their own time. They do that ahead of coming into the lab class, so when they come into the lab class, they hit the ground running, they're maximising the amount of time they have using the equipment, hands-on experience. The pre-lab work, everything that we've done in order to try and move things online, we should definitely keep. We can do simulated practicals. We can actually record somebody doing the practical, or you can do it as a third-person point of view. And one of the most effective practicals I ran last year was to have a GoPro strapped to my chest, and on a Zoom call, I had all the students directing me what the next step of the experiment was going to be. And if we go back to that idea of making mistakes, students were making mistakes. They were picking the wrong option of what to do next. All it means is you have to have a supply of the reagents so you can backtrack. And you allow the students then to direct the next step so they learn from it. The one thing I would recommend if you do that is have a recording of you doing the experiment correctly, so they have at the end of it a video where they actually go from start to finish and learn how to do that experiment correctly. But by making mistakes, not only do they like it because it makes you look bad because the experiment doesn't work, and they always love that when a lecturer makes a mistake, but they're learning from that errors, and that was really powerful. Post-labs as well, we can do some things that we would actually explain in the lab class, how to do the data analysis. Can we put that into a video so that students don't have to worry about whether or not they got everything first time in the lab class? Put it in a video so they can go back to it and watch it again and again. And then we can actually make sure that they really get what they need to do in the post-lab environment as well. The second approach is largely based around simulations. You can go and you can pay companies like Labstore or Learning Science for access to their resources, and they are fantastic, they're really useful. But we've also seen some academics starting to produce their own simulations, whether that's working with a learning technologist, a bit of a polish to it, whether that's just learning to use something like Adobe Captivate for a simple drag and drop simulation. But we're really starting to see that innovation from people. And again, we can use this in a whole really diverse way. We can use it as a pre-lab experience to get that theory in the practice, to give them an idea of what it would be like to use a piece of equipment, even if it is in a drag and drop. We can use it as an immersive experience if you use Master. It creates almost a 3D kind of experience. And again, they learn experientially in that. We can also do it in an experiential gamified way. Labster in particular allows students to make mistakes and blow up labs. So they learn from what not to do as well as what to do. And they can backtrack and they can go through the simulations again. So again, can you make an experience a little bit more engaging for the students? Can you make it a quiz? Can you make it a game? Anything that will engage them a little bit more with what they're doing. The third approach at the start of the pandemic is data sets. You can give them fabricated data sets, you can give them real data sets. Have you got data sets that students generated in previous years that you have access to? Can you make it a bit more challenging? Can you ask them to fill in a questionnaire and then they get a data set based on the quality of the responses that they give you? So the data represents their experimental design. Can you use simulations in order to generate data? Peter Klauper down at Kent has produced some fantastic resources where you can go in and conduct an experiment virtually using his website, and the student can generate data. Can you then use that to actually optimize an experiment and ask the students to keep a lab book which details all the steps that they have used in order to get to that optimized result, and use that as an assessment? Is it possible in the future that we actually generate the data for our students, or they generate it using these kind of resources, so when they come into the lab classes, they're not worried about the data they generate? It doesn't matter. They're in the lab and they're really focusing on learning the skills and not about whether they're doing the experiment right and the quality of the data they get for the write-up, worrying about how many marks they're going to get. So can we use some of these simulations to allow them to generate the data afterwards and make the practicals themselves more formative? The last approach, I actually don't have much experience of myself, so if anybody does have the experience of using virtual reality, augmented reality, I'd really like to hear from you at some point in this conference, because it's something I'd really like to investigate the usage of. But again, it's about creating that 3D virtual environment for students. Interactive learning that allows them to get really immersed in what they're doing. Again, that engagement and something that's a bit different so that students get really passionate again about being scientists. I'd just like to ask one last question about what COVID has offered us. And when I polled the academics in my previous department, the opportunity was the main thing that came from it. We have an opportunity to fundamentally change the way that we teach biosciences moving forwards. The approaches that we've used, we've shown, are beneficial to our students. How we continue to use those, how we continue to enhance those, for me, is the next step. And in that, I'd like to say, what do we do with that opportunity? And I think the big point is to be determined. I don't think anybody in this room is ever going to want to revert back to what they were doing before, at least I hope not. We have to continue to adapt what we've done. If you listen to the Open University, they will say it takes 3 years from concept to product. we're still very much in the early stages of that. We don't know what we're doing properly online yet. There's still a lot of things that we need to learn. And therefore, I think we've got the opportunity to enhance what we're doing moving forward for the benefit of our students. Of course, none of this happens in isolation, so just a few thank yous to Ian Turner and Dave Smith, who helped run the Dry Labs Real Science Network with me, and for everybody who's given up their time to share their innovation and ideas. Without them, there is no network. And so those people that have been at the coalface and have come up with these innovative ideas, thank you. To the team behind Lecture Remotely, they host all of the resources for us. So Joe Rushworth, TJ Moore is now up in Edinburgh, and Bethan Rajowski. If you don't know about the Lecture Remotely website, can I please suggest you go and have a look at it, because it's an absolute gold mine of ideas, not just for lab-based teaching, but for remote teaching and remote lecturing. There's some really fantastic resources. And also to the other networks that have sprung up, so the Dry Labs 20, which is the original chemistry network, which inspired Dry Labs Real Science, and then Dry Labs Down Under, and the Physics LTHE network, which sprung up subsequently, which is chemistry and physics, respectively. Thank you very much for your attention. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I'd like to take any questions if you have them.
Thank you very much, Nigel. That's brilliant. Do we have any questions for Nigel on practical teaching in the pandemic? I've got a microphone here, which I may wave under your nose, or maybe I'll repeat your question for the live stream. Anyone got anything for Nigel? Nick.
So, given that students may not have had much practical experience coming in, what do you suggest the first thing we do with them is when they're confronted with our high-tech labs, which the like of which they'll never seen at school?
That's a good question. I think every situation is going to be unique. Obviously, each discipline's got very specific skills that they need to develop. For me, it's going to be about the patience and sort of upskilling of those students. We're going to have to anticipate that they're not going to know what they're doing. They're going to lack confidence. It's going to be a case, I think, of just holding those students through those first few weeks. They are coming into a brand new environment, coming into university, which is always challenging, learning new skills, understanding how higher education works, the rules of the game, if you like. And I think it's going to be down to the individual academics that are running lab sessions to probably have more support around them through postgraduate demonstrators, additional members of staff coming in, and being much more willing to work with small groups and to demonstrate the use of equipment, the use of sort of different techniques, experimental design, things like that. I think the one thing that we do know is that the students are really keen to learn. Their whole education in the last 2 years has been thrown up in the air. And I think they're craving a little bit of normality. I think getting them into a lab environment, albeit one they've not been in before, is going to be really important in terms of giving them that sort of structure to their degree programme. But I think it's really going to be about patience with the academics and understanding that the students that are coming in are going to be slightly challenged in terms of their practical skill development. So I don't have a concrete answer for you on that one, I'm afraid, no.
I'll take Vaj.
Just a quick question. After being 25 years in the lab, so we know how complicated it is, like practical work. And do you think what we've done, many universities, when deciding to use simulations, like because of COVID and everything, do you think this is even something accessible, or is it the best way to do this? I mean, do you think there is anything like replacement for the practical? There is no practical.
No, I don't think you're ever going to replace needing to be in the lab to learn those skills. There's no way you can replicate using a pipette and knowing what it feels like to go to the first or the second stop, or knowing how high to fill a cuvette for spectrophotometry and not spill it all over the machine and incur the wrath of the technical staff. Those things you have to be in the lab to learn. I think what it does do, using these simulations, it provides a lot more theory and a lot more of an interactive experience for the students to perhaps to understand more about what the equipment they're going to be using is, and to understand why we use that piece of equipment. And again, I think that takes away a lot of that preamble that we would normally have in a lab session about how to use a spectrophotometer, how to use a pipette. Put that into a simulation or a video before they come to the class, and allow them to have more time actually experiencing what it's like to use that pipette and that piece of equipment in the lab itself. So it's not a substitute. I think it's something that we use in addition to augment our teaching.
Thank you. Having used some of the Bioscience and seen some of the resources, I can highly recommend it. It's really fantastic. I had a question about the pre-labs. How do you motivate, any tips that you can offer us in terms of tips to motivate students to engage with the pre-labs before they even come into the labs? Because this is a problem we always have, is they don't look at the videos, they come to the practical class and they say, oh, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to accept you're always going to have a small minority of students who perhaps won't engage with whatever you give them. The way that I did it this year was to embed formative quizzes in videos. So I would create videos of one of the technical staff demonstrating how to use a piece of equipment, but then also record them making common mistakes, and to put those into videos with a formative quiz asking the students to identify what those mistakes were. They had to complete that quiz before they could then get access through an adaptive release on the virtual learning environment to the health and safety protocol, to the lab pro forma. So there are ways that you can perhaps motivate the students to at least open the resources you're putting there, even if some of them just don't engage with it to the highest level. But I think there's ways that you can try and encourage the students to at least engage it to some degree with what you're putting out. But I do think it's a challenge that we all face, that there are some students that just don't engage with what you want to do.
I guess there's also the possibility of summative points, marks, if you're allowed to give little, small bits of summative.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you are allowed to allocate a small amount for something like that, then yeah, that tends to obviously motivate students more to engage with it.
No, it's for the people following on the live stream. It's easier for them.
So one of my concerns with virtual labs is an absence of a sense of jeopardy or kind of high stakes in the experiments. And I wonder if you've given any thought to how you can maybe build in some of that, the fact you don't want an experiment to fail. And it might be good that labs are allowing you to develop a lab, but that's just funny if it's not a real lab. But in a real lab, you don't want to.
No, of course. I think it is a bit light-hearted when you say this, so that getting obviously to explode a lab. I think with these kind of simulations, a lot of it is about the experiential learning. It is about allowing them to make mistakes. And yes, obviously, blowing up a lab is the worst-case scenario. I think getting them engaged with the simulation before they come to a lab class and to have read health and safety briefings to understand the risks that they are actually going to be undertaking in a lab is part of being a scientist.
I think I maybe misled it a little bit with the blowing up. I meant more if we're doing experiments in our own research, there's a sort of time cost and cost associated with it. And if you're running an actual experiment where if it goes wrong, you don't concentrate, you don't think about what you're doing, you mess it up, that's it, you're not going to get the data. I think it's actually something that in an actual lab class can be quite a powerful motivator. It's whether you can then bring that into a simulation where you're sort of saying, well, don't worry what happens, you make mistakes. It doesn't matter because we'll just give you a perfect data set at the end. I wonder whether you're thinking more about it from the other side, saying, well, actually, we want you to take this seriously.
Yeah, but I think that's a progression that they go through as they go through their academic career. I mean, obviously, when they're in their first year, they are going to make mistakes. They're coming into an environment where they don't understand what all the equipment does, how to use it. They are going to make those mistakes at the start. I think you still have to have that, obviously, so when they get to the final year, if they go into a wet lab, and obviously Dave's done some fantastic work around the types of projects that you can do which don't necessarily involve them being in a lab. Those students do want that lab experience. Part of being a scientist is understanding the consequences of the actions and what they're doing, and good experimental design. So we talked about, that scientific method. I think that's all part of the training that they have to have as they move through. And a lot of that will be fall down onto the final year project supervisors as well, to ensure that they are aware of the consequences of their actions. That antibodies cost hundreds of thousands of pounds per mil, and they're not aware of that. When you tell a student that, it's sort of like you're talking 100 microlitres of an antibody is 400, 500 pounds. They're like, what? That's the first time they've ever had that realisation that there are such financial consequences to it. So perhaps that's something that needs to be built in the education side of it, and to be a professional scientist. And that's maybe not in the opening years of their degree course, but as they move into the second, third year and into their final year project, then that's probably where we need to make them more aware of those ramifications of not doing things correctly.
You can get them to sign into their PayPal account before they go into labs.
Yes. So there was quite a lot of comments on the importance of class practicals for socialising students and building a sense of community. So I wonder if that's something that you can get with online practicals to stop it being a solitary in your bedroom.
Certainly the point of view practical that I ran, I was worried that there wouldn't be much engagement from the students, and they wouldn't want to use the chat feature within the Zoom. What I actually found was the complete opposite. They were discussing amongst themselves what they thought the next step should be. We did do a couple of breakout rooms with them, so they had the opportunity to discuss in smaller groups. But I do think it's really challenging. And I've just moved institution to Cardiff, and they ran a survey of their first year students. And one of the harrowing statistics that came back was that 85% of the students didn't feel they had a relationship with any other member of their cohort. And that's because they haven't had that opportunity to be in the labs. I think you can create relationships in a virtual environment. It's certainly not the same as being with somebody working in pairs or small groups in a lab. And I think, again, it's one of those things that you can't 100% replicate, but there are ways that you can at least try to maximise the experience that they have using small groups, using breakout rooms, getting that kind of interactivity, using polling software within, what's the next step, vote on it, and getting the students to actually then directly, at least they're sort of interacting with one another a little bit. But I absolutely agree. It's so important when we are allowed back into the labs. We work really hard to ingratiate those students into our courses and give them that sense of a learning community, because it's going to be so fundamental for them.
A bit of a devil's advocate question here. We've reduced the time duration of our practicals, and our group sizes are larger. I read an article about secondary school science a while ago, and many of the students said they liked practicals because they were easy. They could socialise, they could take a back seat, they could allow someone who's keen to do the experiment for them. And I've observed some of that in practicals in first year. They occupy half of our first year students' timetable and way more than half of our budget. And I do wonder whether or not many of them are there just to follow some instructions, and whether we pat ourselves on the back that we're providing that opportunity. I do question sometimes whether we should try harder with practicals and allow, or almost oblige failure. Many of our students don't like the uncertainty of practicals that have failure as a possibility. So, are we doing as much as we could?
It's a really good question. I think one of the things I saw this year was that we made all our students work individually. And so there wasn't that opportunity to just sit back and allow somebody else to do the experiment for them, because they had to generate their own data. I don't know that it's practical to be able to ask technicians to do that in the long run. But I think a lot of the things that we have put in place already in order to try and enhance that pre-lab experience, maybe that will reduce some of that anxiety that students have coming into the lab environment. Maybe that will make them a little bit more willing to engage with the practicals. And maybe because they haven't had that social interaction, they will be more dynamic in the relationships they develop with people that they're working with in pairs. I absolutely fundamentally agree. I don't think there's an easy answer to that. I think it's about creating an environment there in the labs where the students aren't afraid to ask questions, where they do have the opportunity to learn from watching other people, from engaging with either the academics, the technicians, or the postdocs that are helping to run those sessions, the postgrad students. and just making them aware that it's a really supportive environment that those students need moving forward. And I think that's all we can do at this stage, I think, is to try and maximise the engagement that the students show with the practicals. As I've said, there are always going to be some students that don't want to engage, and we've all got that tail of students, no matter what institution we're at, where they're there and they are studying, but they're not engaging as much as their students. And you know, I think that's always a challenge that every institution faces every single year, as to how to maximise that student group and sort of to motivate them to become better students. And I think time will tell whether we can actually maximise that through the approaches that we've got.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all those thought-provoking questions, and thank you particularly to Nigel for your work on that. Brilliant. Let's thank Nigel. So sticking firmly with the tradition of the Bioscience Education Summit, we've now got a sequence of 4 lightning talks, so 10-minute talks and 5-minute Q&A sessions that we call the swap shop sessions. So these are, as you know, sort of practical focused talks, and the first of those is going to be given by a gentleman who was name-checked in the previous talk, Alfred Tumza. Yes. Have I got that right? Yes. From Surrey. Brilliant. Come over, Alfred, and we'll see if we can get your talk up here. Have you got? Did you bring your laptop? Is that right?
No, I thought it was just going to.
Oh, everything's on here. Bring it up here.
Can I start talking or?
You can absolutely start.
Right. Good afternoon, everyone. It's so nice to see you all 3D and online in 2D, so let's not forget them. My first Biosummit was 2 years ago. That was my last one as well. The reason I've come back is because I found the environment really user-friendly, right? So don't disappoint. No. Right, so while Nigel was giving his talk, I've interacted with Nigel on Dry Labs, and we've had talks, and he's just encouraged me, as have quite a few people in the audience. Well, while he's giving his talk, I was virtually rewriting my talk. Right, so some of the things that Nigel has mentioned, I'm going to sort of touch on a little bit. I am one of those people that thinks learning is about community, it's about social space, it's about emotion. And maybe I can convince you a little bit through what I'm going to talk about that is the case. And if not, I'm quite open to really hard questions. Okay, I can see Nick smiling already. So what I'm going to talk about is some online practicals. I'm going to talk about 3 practicals. I started this process about 8 years ago, talking to the Open University about their online practicals. Nobody at my institution, which I'll quickly walk away from, wanted to engage because they were a little bit clunky at that time. And then about 3 years ago, the Open University, specifically James Smith at the Open University, we started talking about their practicals, how to bring them into a module that I teach at 2nd year, level 5, which is Analytical and Clinical Biochemistry. Now in this module, what I do is I teach optical spectroscopy, so I go beyond the UV vis, I go to fluorescence, IR, NMR, things like that. Chromatography, I break it down into 2 components. One is active protein chromatography, and the other one is small chemical chromatography, HPLC, GC, etc. A little bit on electrophoresis, specifically SDS-Page and the chemistry of SDS-Page. Why does the gel focus? Things like that. Then I've got colleagues that teach clinical tests and biomarkers, although I'll be teaching that next year. And then we do talk about statistics. We revisit statistics every year. I come from the concept of applying statistics, not the mathematical background, and they have to sort of use that knowledge in their reports. Sorry, I was just going to check, can everybody hear me? Sorry, I didn't do my accessibility check there. Right, so in terms of assessments patterns, what we had a few years ago was 2 practical reports. They were 15% each, and then we had a multiple choice questionnaire at the end, 70%. I'm not a fan of multiple choice, definitely not at level 5, but we had a big class, and there's a lot of marking involved. So I changed things a little bit. I moved away from a final exam. On my modules, virtually no final exams anymore. It's all open book coursework based. So in this one, they've got 2 reports, 50% weighting each. The topics are there. Report 1. Report 1 is marked by myself and student demonstrators, postgraduate students. I train those students in terms of what their expectations are. And what we do is we mark 5 reports each, and then we have a look at what our marks are. What I found this year was that because I was training the guys, the postgrads were much stricter than I was, which was quite nice from the average 80-90% report marking they do at level 4. So clearly they'd learned something, or I just had that scary look, you know, a bit of both. Right, so we turn it around in 3 weeks so that they get the feedback before the next report is due, and they get annotated scripts, they get a rubric feedback, and they get one-to-one options. So when they come for one-to-one options, those are online, they have to do what I call a SNOB analysis, so they have to reflect on the feedback they got. And then we have a sort of a neural discussion about the mark rather than where did I lose marks, because when I hear that phrase I just go a little bit ballistic. But okay, so then they get the second report, they submit the second report, and between the first and the second reports, on average we had a 5 to 10% mark increase. So I'm just going to say that's the brilliant feedback. Right, so the Open Science Laboratory, this is by the Open University. They've got a whole host of different practicals. Some of them are free and open access, others are closed. The ones that I'm going to talk about are closed. We do pay for them, but that's just the way life goes. Right, so the first one is quantitative HPLC, high pressure liquid chromatography, and it links to a biochemical topic that we teach, myself and others, in pharmacology, and that's drug metabolism. So what they look at here is the conversion of one drug to its metabolite. They measure that drug, or the drugs, using these HPLC. They have to quantify the peaks using these little triangles. They set up a standard curve, and then once they've done the standard curves, they've got patient samples. They've got 4 groups of patients. In addition to the HPLC spectra, they've also got mass spec, so they can confirm the structure using the mass spec data. Right, so the patient groups, they've got 4 patient groups, and the students that had been attending my lectures, I do pre-recorded lecture sessions before this, will have known about genotypes, metabolizer genotypes, And basically, each one of these groups is a metabolizer genotype. On the left-hand side in green is the parent drug, and then the hash is the metabolite. And you can hopefully see there are different ratios there. And those ratios, they then link to what we call fast metabolizers and slow metabolizers. Okay, and this is important in terms of prescribing the drugs and drug levels. Okay, so that they have to also convert their data into concentration using their standard curve. So they have to link those things together. In addition, they have to think about the statistical analysis that they need to undertake here. They get help if they want it, and we help them as much as possible. Okay, one thing I just wanted to mention before we carry on. Although these are online practicals, they do take place or can take place in an IT room. Last year we also gave students a Zoom streaming, but we're going to stop that because we didn't feel that that really worked. One thing that did work on Zoom was that the students were talking a lot in the chat function. Not quite about the practical, but they were talking a lot. Right, so that's the first practical. That's the one that goes into report 1. Then we come to the second practical. Creatinine clearance is essentially kidney function. Okay, and this links to a second part of the report where they get clinical data and they have to analyze what the biochemistry is behind the clinical data. Okay, so in this creatinine clearance, this is what it looks like. They basically select an age, they get a value, and then they have to write down the value or record the value. They can get it as a spreadsheet. On the left-hand side is our VLE, our virtual learning environment. It's seamless integration, at least with the help of our digital learning guys. Okay, so one question that they address here is the effect of age